Fáilte a while, my friends. So in preparation of my daughter being born this December, I've been reading loads of old books in search of the perfect stories to tell her. I came across this story about a princess and thought I would share it with you all. So here is The 12 Wild Geese by Patrick Kennedy. There once was a king and queen that lived very happily together, and they had 12 sons and not a single daughter. We are always wishing for what we haven't, and don't care for what we have, and so it was with the queen. One day in winter, when the bawn was covered with snow, she was looking out of the parlour window and saw there was a calf that was just killed by the butcher, and a raven standing near it. "Oh," says she, "if I had only a daughter with her skin as white as that snow, her cheeks as red as that blood, and her hair as black as that raven, I'd give away every one of my 12 sons for her." The moment she said the word, she got a great fright and a shiver went through her, and in an instant, a severe-looking old woman stood before her. "That was a wicked wish you made," said she, "and to punish you, it will be granted. You will have such a daughter as you desire, but the very day of her birth you will lose your other children." She vanished the moment she said those words, and that very way it turned out. When she expected her delivery, she had all her children in a large room of the palace, with guards all around it. But the very hour her daughter came into the world, the guards inside and outside heard a great whirling and whistling, and the 12 princes were seen, flying one after the other, out through the open window, and away like so many arrows over the woods. Well, the king was in great grief for the loss of his sons, and he would be very enraged with his wife if he only knew that she was so much to blame for it. Everyone called the little princess Snow White and Rose Red on account of her beautiful complexion. She was the most loving and lovable child that could be seen anywhere. When she was 12 years old, she began to be very sad and lonely, and to torment her mother asking her about the brothers she thought were dead. For none up to that time were ever told of the exact thing that happened to them. The secret was weighing very heavy on the queen's conscience, and as the little girl persevered with her questions, at last she told her. "Well, mother," said she, "it was on my account my poor brothers were changed into wild geese, and are now suffering all sorts of hardship. Before the world is a day older, I'll be off to seek them, and try to restore them to their own shapes." The king and queen had her well watched, but all was no use. The next night, she was getting through the woods that surrounded the palace, and she went on and on that night, until the evening of next day. She had a few cakes with her, and she got nuts, and murra greens, and some sweet crabs as she went along. At last she came to a nice wooden house just at sunset. There was a fine garden around it, full of the handsomest flowers, and a gate in the hedge. She went in and saw a table laid out with 12 plates, 12 knives and forks, 12 spoons, and there were cakes, and cold wild fowl, and fruit along with the plates, and there was a good fire. And in another long room there were 12 beds. Well, while she was looking about her, she heard the gate opening, and footsteps along the walk. In came 12 young men, and there was great grief and surprise all on their faces when they laid eyes on her. "Oh, what misfortune sent you here?" said the eldest. "For the sake of a girl we were obliged to leave our father's court, and be in the shape of wild geese all day. That's 12 years ago, and we took a solemn oath that we would kill the first young girl that came into our hands. It's a pity to put such an innocent and handsome girl as you are out of the world, but we must keep our oath." "But," said she, "I'm your only sister that never knew anything about this till yesterday, and I stole away from our father and mother's palace last night to find you out, and relieve you if I can." Every one of them clasped his hands and looked down on the floor, and you could hear a pin fall till the eldest cried out, "A curse light on our oath. What shall we do?" "I'll tell you that," said an old woman that appeared in an instant among them. "Break your wicked oath which no one should keep. If you attempted to lay an uncivil finger on her, I'll change you into the 12 bouillon buis. But I wish well to you, as well as to her. She is appointed to be your deliverer in this way. She must spin and knit 12 shirts for you, out of bog down, to be gathered by her own hands on the moor just outside of the wood. It will take her 5 years to do it, and if she speaks, or laughs, or cries, the whole time. You will have to remain wild geese by day till you're called out of this world. So take care of your sister. It is worth your while." The fairy then vanished, and it was only a strife with the brothers to see who would be the first to kiss and hug their sister. So for 3 long years the poor young princess was occupied, pulling bog down, spinning it, and knitting it into shirts. And at the end of 3 years she had 8 made. During all that time she never spoke a word, nor laughed, nor cried. The last was the hardest to refrain from. One fine day she was sitting in the garden spinning, when in sprung a fine greyhound and bounded up to her, and laid his paws on her shoulder, licked her forehead and her hair. The next minute a beautiful young prince rode up to the little garden gate, took off his hat, and asked for leave to come in. She gave him a little nod, and in he walked. He made so many apologies for intruding, and asked her ever so many questions, but not a word could he get out of her. He loved her so much from the first moment that he could not leave her till he told her he was king of a country just bordering the forest, and he begged her to come with him and be his wife. She couldn't help loving him as much as he did her, and though she shook her head very often and was very sorry to leave her brothers, at last she nodded her head and put her hand in his. She knew well enough that the good fairy and her brothers would be able to find her out. Before she went, she brought out a basket holding all her bog down, and another holding the 8 shirts. The attendants took charge of these, and the prince placed her before him on his horse. The only thing that disturbed him while riding along was the displeasure his stepmother would feel at what he had done. However, he was full master at home, and as soon as he arrived he sent for the bishop, got his bride nicely dressed, and the marriage was celebrated, the bride answering by signs. He knew by her manners she was of high birth, and no two could be fonder of each other. The wicked stepmother did all that she could to make mischief, saying she was sure she was only a woodman's daughter, but nothing could disturb the young king's opinion of his wife. In good time the young queen was delivered of a beautiful boy, and the king was so glad he hardly knew what to do for his joy. All the grandeur of the christening and the happiness of the parents tormented by the bad woman more than I can tell you, and she was determined to put a stop to all of their comfort. She got a sleeping posset given to the young mother, and while she was thinking of how she could best make away with the child, she saw a wicked-looking wolf in the garden, looking up at her and licking his chops. She lost no time, but snatched the child from the arms of the sleeping woman and pitched it out. The beast caught it in his mouth and was over the garden fence in a minute. The wicked woman then pricked her own fingers and dabbled the blood around the mouth of the sleeping mother. Well, the young king was just then coming into the big bawn from hunting, and as soon as he entered the house, she beckoned to him, shed a few crocodile tears, began to cry and wring her hands, and hurried him along into the passage to the bedchamber. Oh, wasn't the poor king frightened when he saw the queen's mouth bloody and the missing child. It would take 2 hours to tell you of the devilment of the old queen, the confusion and the fright and the grief for the young king and queen, the bad opinion he began to feel for his wife, and the struggle she had to keep down her bitter sorrow and not give way to it by speaking or lamenting. The young king would not allow anyone to be called, and ordered his stepmother to give out that the child fell from the mother's arms at the window, and that a wild beast ran off with it. The wicked woman pretended to do so, but she told underhand to everybody she spoke to what the king and herself saw in the bedchamber. The young queen was the most unhappy woman in the 3 kingdoms for a long time, between sorrow for her child and her husband's bad opinion. Still she neither spoke nor cried, and she gathered bog down and went on with the shirts. Often the 12 wild geese would be seen lighting on the trees in the park or on the smooth sod, and looking in at her through the windows. So she worked on to get the shirts finished, but another year was at an end, and she had the 12th shirt finished except for one arm, when she was obliged to take to her bed, and a beautiful girl was born. Now the king was on his guard, and he would not let the mother and child be left alone for a minute. But the wicked woman bribed some of the attendants, set others asleep, gave the sleepy posset to the queen, and had a person watching to snatch the child away and to kill it. But what should she see but the same wolf in the garden looking up and licking his chops again. Out went the child, and away it flew with the wolf, and she smeared the sleeping mother's mouth and face with blood, and then roared and bawled and cried out to the king and to everybody she met. and the room was filled, and everyone was sure the young queen had just devoured her own babe. The poor mother thought now her life would leave her. She was in such a state she could neither think nor pray, but she sat like a stone and worked away in the arm of the 12th shirt. The king was taking her to the house in the wood where he found her, but the stepmother and the lords of the court and judges would not hear of it, and she was condemned to be burned at the big dawn at 3 o'clock on the same day. When the hour drew near, the king went to the farthest part of his palace, and there was no more an unhappy man in his kingdom at that hour. When the executioners came and led her off, she took the pile of shirts in her arms. There were still a few stitches wanted, and while they were all tying her to the stakes, she still worked on it. At the last stitch, she seemed overcome and dropped a tear on her work, but the moment after she sprang up and shouted, "I am innocent, call my husband." The executioners stayed their hands except one wicked disposed creature, who set fire to the branches next to him, and while all were struck in amazement, there was a rushing of wings, and in a moment 12 wild geese were standing around the pile. Before you could count 12, she flung a shirt over each bird, and there in the twinkling of an eye were 12 of the most finest young men that could be collected out of 1,000. While some were untying their sister, the eldest, taking a strong stake in his hand, struck the busy executioner with such a blow that he never needed another. Whilst they were comforting the young queen, the king was hurrying to the spot. A fine-looking woman appeared among them, holding a baby in one arm and a little prince by the hand. There was nothing but crying for joy, and laughing for joy, and hugging and kissing, and when anyone had time to thank the good fairy, who, in the shape of a wolf, carried a child away, she was not to be found. Never was such happiness enjoyed in any palace that was ever built, and if the wicked queen and her helpers were not torn by wild horses, they richly deserved it. And that is the story of the 12 Wild Geese by Patrick Kennedy. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button down below. It helps the channel grow and helps more people find my videos. This is Jay from Our Legends. Good night and good luck.